Yo, welcome to PORA. I'm your host, David Russell, and I'm joined here with a conglomerate of people and podcasts today. Well, there is one that I have to mention. It's called The Mentionables, and I haven't heard from them in a long time. It is worth mentioning, whether they're still alive or not. Well, I got Caleb Johnson here. Are you guys still alive, Caleb?
Still alive, just going through some personal changes in life, so it's been kind of hard to get on the air.
Yeah, man, a little hiatus there, aren't you? I'm
Yeah.
also here with my co-host Travis Worth. What's up, Travis? Thanks for joining me earlier.
Yeah, what's going on, David? Really looking forward to this. This is a topic that I've kind of, as a Christian, have kind of given a lot of thought to and kind of shifted my views somewhat. So I'm kind of, really looking forward to getting into some of that tonight.
Right on, finally, and last but not least, we've got Tyler Fowler here. He is from CSG. He is the man of CSG. What's going on, brother?
Not much, brother. Just ready for this discussion. Kind of like Travis, I've been thinking about this a lot lately, and I don't know. I think there's a couple ways to deal with that. So I'm looking forward to the conversation and looking forward to what you guys got to say about it. So
right on. So, Caleb, you said you had some personal things going on. I heard you moved recently, man. Is that true?
In the process of it.
In the process, nice.
So
man.
I've got a few days coming up where I will officially be homeless, at least for a week or so between moving to the new place. So
yeah. Still in Virginia, right?
Yep, just up the road a little bit.
Just up. Oh, okay. Yeah, I was hoping you'd come closer to me so we could actually hang out some. But
about 45 minutes closer.
45, not bad. Right on. Yeah, if nobody knows, me and Caleb are both from Virginia, so that's how kind of we hooked up through those type of means. But yeah, Tyler, what's going on with CSG, man?
Oh man, we got a lot of things going on. So next week we got Chris Featherstone. We're going to talk about cluster A personality disorder. So there's a lot of personal with that in my family, really. And so I invited Chris to come on to talk about that cluster A personality disorder. And then going into the beginning of the year, we've got 10 episodes that's going to be lined up. So David is actually going to help Travis. I think you're going to be in on a couple of those episodes with us. If not, you're going to be now. But anyway, it's going to be an intro to Christianity for believers, unbelievers, just a basic intro. But different in the sense of practicality. So how do we apply these things we talk about on a weekly basis, like theology? So that's going to be really fun. That's going to be really exciting. So just a lot of things, a lot of different things going on, a lot of good things going on, and just continue to worship God and glorify Christ, bro.
Yeah, man, that's what it's about, brother. That really is. That's why I like doing these extravaganzas, because we can get other people that are doing the same type of work and just come together and talk about issues or just unwind a little bit and nerd out, on theology or whatever, it don't matter. Hey man, we also got Clinton Wilcox, and hey guys, if you want to join and you want to come late to the party and have a couple talking points with in regards to horror movies or whatever, it doesn't matter. We can do that. So yeah, man, I don't mind. We can have up, I think, to nine people on the stream or something if you're paying for StreamYard, right, Caleb?
Yeah, it's like 9 or 10.
Yeah, right on. But welcome, Clinton Wilcox, man. What's going on with you, buddy? I haven't seen you in a while.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I've just been actually pretty busy here. I recently moved from my home in the Central Valley of California to New Mexico. So, that has kind of kept me busy. I've been, still doing some pro-life work here and there, but really, unfortunately, pro-life work doesn't really pay the bills. So I've had to find some local work. I've actually joined up with 2 local rock bands. One is an original band, one is a cover band, and because I gotta make that green to help pay the bills. So that's primarily what I've been working on here. But I still do pro-life work, just not as heavily as I used to. I'd like to. It's just unfortunately real life kind of gets in the way.
Yeah, I hear you, man. And it's kind of funny though, that you say that and stuff. The last time I spoke to Clinton, I thought he didn't like me anymore because I got him to go on the show called SNS, and and it wasn't a good experience. And I was like, man, he's gonna hate me for life, putting him in that situation because I ended up not being able to make it. So there was no way I could have like controlled the narrative and moderated like I wanted to, and it just went south really, really fast. And I was a little upset, to say the least. But I'll tell you guys about some of what happened thereafter a little later on. But
sure, because actually, I actually don't really remember. I think it went so bad that I actually just kind of blocked it out of my mind. But yeah, it was a pretty bad experience, and that's been my experience with atheist YouTube programs. They start, and I'm sure it's probably not this way with everybody, so I don't want to over generalize, because I know there are some good atheist YouTubers out there, but my experience with atheist YouTube programs is they promise to be nice and cordial and want a two-way conversation, but then when I actually get on the program, it ends up being more like a one-way bash the Christian, bash the pro-lifer kind of thing. So I'm kind of leery at the programs I agree to do now.
Yeah, no, I hear you. I don't blame you, especially ones that I invite you to, I guess.
well, no, it's fine. I mean, you obviously weren't expecting that either. I don't hold that against you. It's just like I said, I've just been real busy trying to find ways to pay the bills essentially while I've been here in New Mexico, because I had a steady job back in Fresno, where I was doing music for a church and making making a steady monthly paycheck through that. And when I got to New Mexico, it's like, I gave up that paycheck, and it's just now I'm back in having to try and find a way to get a steady cash flow coming in again. And so I'm almost to that point now that I'm playing with a couple of local bands. So hopefully I should have more time to do stuff like this now.
Yeah, well, that's awesome, man. I hope you can. I hope to see the Mentionables starting to go live again. That was fun to watch you guys on Saturdays and stuff.
Yeah,
but, yeah,
I kind of miss doing that.
Yeah, man. Yeah, I miss seeing you guys. But
we'll get back to it.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Caleb Jackson, I haven't introduced you yet. What's going on, brother?
What's going on? How you doing? Happy Halloween Eve, right?
Right. Yeah, man. It's Devil's Night, they say, right?
Well, tomorrow is.
Yeah. But what's the day before? Wasn't it supposed to be like Devil's Night and then Halloween? I don't know.
Oh, is it? Oh, I guess I thought they were synonymous. Or not?
No, but yeah. So, guys, tonight I want to talk about Christians and horror movies. I'm gonna let Caleb start off because he's got the Freddy Krueger hand.
Got the Jason mask.
Oh, look at that! Look at that.
Yeah.
So, should Christians? Let's just go with the punchline. Should Christians watch horror movies? And guys, again, let's just keep the invite open for anybody that wants to come in. As far as our, our other podcast friends, if you want to come in late, you're more than welcome to. It's fine. If you have any points, just shoot them out there. If anybody in the comments doesn't have a link, just let me know. I'll give you the link. But yeah, so Caleb, what are your thoughts here, man?
I would say yes, tentatively, depending on what kind of movie it is and depending on your intention. That's probably like the one word answer I could give, right? But it really just depends on the content and why you're doing it. Because I think fiction and art at the end of the day is just that. It's fiction and it's art. And sometimes it's made to get a message across. Sometimes it's made to entertain. I don't think anything's wrong with that in of itself. It just depends on how you consume media in that way. But certainly that can be fun. And to me, actually, I mean, and people act, Halloween may have roots in Celtic paganism, which is what some people say, but it is still a Christian-oriented religion because the Catholic Church came in and said, hey, you all have to make this All Saints Day now. You have to get the evil out before that. So, yeah, I don't really see that as being an issue. I think it's a celebration of the defeat of evil. It's instead of being afraid of evil, you have kids dressing up as monsters getting candy. So if anything, I think that just shows that like evil is defeated, and it's almost a mockery of that. So that's what Halloween means to me, and kind of the celebration of horror films in that way.
All right. Who wants to go next?
Yeah, I'll go next.
All right, go ahead, Clint.
Yeah, because This is actually a conversation I recently had with my sister and my nieces too. I've begun homeschooling my nieces, and so I'm trying to partially be responsible for their education as well. And of course, this is a question that comes up. My niece, especially my oldest niece, middle oldest, the oldest one who lives here, she is in high school. I believe she's 14, and wanted to start watching some horror films because Halloween was coming up, so she felt it was appropriate. And so my sister showed her a couple horror films, and one of those films that she showed her was the movie Saw. And she couldn't sit through Saw. Like, she couldn't get, like, I think more than 10 minutes through it because it was just too intense for her, which, doesn't surprise me, and I doubt it would probably surprise any of you. And so, what I told her essentially was that, I'm not opposed, morally, spiritually, whatever, to Christians watching horror films, because I think horror films can be great films, especially if they have a message to them, or try to just like teach life lessons or whatever. Even if those life lessons are bad, they can still provide good fodder for discussion and for thinking through some of the themes in the films. In fact, a lot of the films we watch, like Lord of the Rings, has some horrific elements to it. So it's really not just the horrific elements. It's more just like what the movie writer or the book writer is trying to do with these. A film like Saw is more like what they call torture porn. There's no real redeeming value to watching it. It's just, you're watching it so that you can see the people get killed and just try to find their way out of this really gruesome situation. But a movie that has these horrific elements but has teaches some kind of life lesson, shows us that no matter what the situation is, there are always ways that we can find to escape it. One of my favorite horror films is A Quiet Place. It's a scary, intenseful film, but there are a lot of themes that you can find, themes of like family and love and things like that. So I think those elements to it redeem it. And so instead of showing my niece a movie like Saw, I actually exposed two of my nieces to two of my favorite horror films of all time, Tremors and Ernest Scared Stupid. And so now, of course, those movies aren't, what we traditionally think of as scary, but they have horror elements, and of course, they're primarily comedic films. But they're also really good films with with good messages that you can find, messages of heroism. Kevin Bacon and his friend in Tremors, or like Kevin Bacon. This girl is on the what do you call that thing? The thing that bounces up and down.
Moon bounce.
Yeah, well, whatever you call that thing, but it's like the monster. Yeah, that she's like jumping up and down on it, and the monster is coming after her, and without even thinking about it, Kevin Bacon's character just runs out there, grabs the girl, and gets her to safety. So he saved her life without even thinking. And some of these things are just things that we can point to as good elements that we can take from as lessons. And just one final point I would say, because there are some horror films which are ultimately disappointing too. A movie that came out I think a few years ago called The Bellco Experiment was actually on my radar. A movie about these people who are trapped in this building and essentially saying, if you don't kill one person, I'm going to kill 5 people or whatever. And I thought that sounds like a really interesting, ethical tale. No matter what the characters ultimately decide, it sounds like a very interesting ethical dilemma. And I was curious how they handled it. But then someone I knew who had seen the film told me that they actually do very little with that premise, and it's really just more about finding new and exotic ways to kill people. That really killed any sort of interest that I had in watching that film, because it could have been a very interesting ethical discussion, even if it ended up being kind of bloody and gory. There could have been some redeeming values to watching it, but considering I was told that they do very little with the premise, that really killed any sort of interest that I had with the film. So, all this to just kind of say, back in a nutshell, that I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with horror films. I think there are certain types of movies that we should avoid, certain types of content in films that we should avoid. But ultimately, there may be a number of redeeming values in a film that has these horrific elements that we can take from it, either to take lessons to learn or just providing good fodder for discussion.
Right on. Hey, Tyler, why don't you give it a stab, my friend?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think 2 great points have been raised so far. 1, why are you watching them? 2, what is the point of the author's intent, let's say, right? What is what are these creators trying to portray, and why are you watching them to glorify God? Is there a problem with horror movies in and of themselves? I don't know. I personally don't like them, right? Like, they don't appeal to me in any way. Now, whenever Clint brought up Tremors, like, I love Tremors, right? But I see that as kind of like a comedy thing. So it's really subjective, but I think two objective things need to be raised. Why are you watching them? What is the point? What is the creator trying to give? What is he trying to push? What is he trying to brand?
Right on. Caleb Johnson, not Jackson.
Yeah,
CJs, man.
And actually, my middle name is James, and I was known as CJ for most of my life. So we got.
Oh wow.
Oh, wow.
You can just do CJ Clinton and Caleb. Caleb Johnson can be the official Caleb for tonight.
There we go.
thanks. I appreciate that.
So humble of you.
I'll actually just
Yeah.
add that I think some horror movies can be some of the best Christian movies out there, if you will, because any horror movie grapples with the problem of evil in some sense. And one of the interesting things about any horror movie you watch is, how do they deal with that? Is there a good force on the other side of this evil or not? Personally, I think the scariest ones are in the cosmic horror genre, where there is no good. You grapple with the reality of a universe that's absurd, and in dealing with that, when characters face that and deal with the madness and the difficulties that come with grappling with the fact that maybe God is evil, or these kind of questions come up in movies in a way that I don't see it in. You don't see it in action. You don't see it in a lot of drama films occasionally, but I think you find more discussion points from a Christian worldview, or ways to approach these films in discussion. So I think they're some of the best examples to pull from for discussing issues of kind of apologetics.
Right on. Travis, we're on you, bud.
Okay, great. So I think there's kind of two issues. Now, one, and this is mainly for myself, I don't advocate, and I don't really even think it's appropriate to watch movies that are demonically oriented, like movies involving the occult. I think that's something that I would want to steer clear from. Then another thing with a lot of the slasher, like blood and guts kind of movies, it's like, I don't see what the entertainment purposes is. Like, well, why you would find, what the actual entertainment value in watching something like that is. But with those 2 points being said, I am a horror movie buff. In fact, I love zombie movies. Like, I love the Walking Dead. In fact, I'm looking forward to the movies to find out what happens with Rick. Because that was kind of left a cliffhanger. So there are some that I really, really like. I think we just need to use kind of discretion.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the points that I wanted to bring up. I think you guys have made some pretty fantastic points, like, what is the purpose? Why are you watching it? What should we watch? I mean, does it have a message? Do we look at the problem of evil when we're actually watching it? Are we just being entertained? But it does bring up the idea of, what is it, the genre, because I think everybody would consider certain horror movies aren't horror movies, right? Slasher movies to me are not horror. They don't make sense to me as horror. Something that really scares me would be something like The Sixth Sense, right? That would be something that really boggles with my mind. So if what type of genre are we considering him? We considering them? So what do we consider there?
Yeah, if I could just interject real quick, I was just going to say, because I think slasher films are usually considered kind of a subgenre of horror films. Because I'm right with you. Like, I just don't find slasher films entertaining at all. Like, I've never seen Scream or Nightmare on Elm Street, anything like that. But it's the atmospheric horror films, the ones that don't necessarily, they might have slasher villains, A Quiet Place has villains which could be considered slasher villains, but the jump scares are kept to a very minimum, and there's no real gruesome deaths, even though you do have a few people who die in the film. So it's really more of an atmospheric film, even though there are certain slasher elements. Or, a famous example, a movie like Alien is an atmospheric horror film, but the xenomorph is a kind of slasher villain. So I really think slasher would kind of be more considered a subgenre of horror, and then the atmospheric films like Sixth Sense and films like that, I think, are just kind of a different subgenre, at least what they would be considered by aficionados of the form of horror.
Yeah, I'll piggyback a little bit off of some of the stuff Clinton has said. I'll take the second part first, because I agree. I think there's different subgenres. So supernatural is a subgenre, slasher is a subgenre. Slasher is typically just like teen horror involving a serial killer with a knife, typically, or some iterations of that. But I think it's interesting because I've seen from the commentaries I've seen on it, it's people point out that slasher films actually do reflect kind of a moral tale of like almost enforcing Christian morality. Because in slasher films, who are the characters that always die? It's the ones who are having sex. It's the ones who are doing drugs. The one who survives, the final girl, is almost always the good virgin girl, the one who's not doing all these things. So it's almost like it's a warning, against these things. If you do this, you're going to be the one who gets killed. So in a kind of ironic way, you see that almost promoting Christian morality to a certain degree,
especially when you consider the context of it being in the 60s and 70s when a lot of these came out.
So you guys are talking about like Cabin in the Woods type.
Yeah, well, Cabin in the Woods is a parody. Well, and Clinton mentioned Scream too. Scream and Cabin in the Woods are kind of meta parodies of it, where they're self-aware. I don't know how many of you have seen Scream. It's one of my favorites, but because Scream, like they acknowledge, like, oh, don't say "I'll be right back." That's how people in horror movies die, and then so they're self-aware almost.
Well, but I might actually enjoy it then, because I enjoy parodies. So maybe
it's not it's not a like Scary Movie's a parody. It's not a parody. It's somewhat. It's like self-aware. It's kind of funny at some parts. It's still meant to be taken seriously, but it is a bit lighter of like it's self-aware. But and one of the other things you brought up earlier was like Saw as an example, and I agree that torture movies in general are not very substantive, but I actually think Saw is interesting for those who've seen at least the first one. The sequels kind of get all bogged down, but because the main premise of it is that there's this old man who has cancer, and he doesn't feel like people appreciate their own lives because he has a time clock of when he's going to die of a terminal brain cancer, and he's looking around and seeing these people who are wasting their lives away. And so by putting them in these horrible situations where they have a chance to escape, he in a twisted way, I'm not defending his actions, sees it as therapeutic. And in this way, it's supposed to be helping them. And it's basically the whole point of the movie is like appreciating your life. And the people who are being put into these traps are drug addicts and thieves and people who've done a lot of bad stuff, people who are having affairs, people who are doing a lot of bad stuff. And usually the trap they're in is themed around their struggle and their sin, what they are, and they usually have to do something to do that. And it also has a lot of those moral dilemmas of like, do you sacrifice yourself to save one else, or do you have to pick between having two people survive, which one's going to do? And so there's a lot of really interesting moral dilemmas that I see in some of that. So I to the contrary, I don't really see it necessarily as completely pointless. It just depends on the context you view it.
Right. Anybody else? Before I move on to my next set here, I do want to go around the round robin here and do the what's your favorite horror movie?
That's a quote from Scream
scary
2.
movie.
Yeah, that's a quote from Scream 2. Yeah.
I'll go.
One of those quotes everyone knows, even if you haven't seen it.
Right.
What's your favorite?
Go ahead.
Exactly.
Go ahead, Travis. Travis, you're first, bud.
Sorry, my mic's been muted. Sorry about that.
I couldn't hear you.
Yeah. That's really interesting. I think my favorite is a TV show, The Walking Dead. I really love zombie movies. I mean, I love zombie movies. I guess if I had to pick one, it would be the Walking Dead universe. And there's like, the show's kind of branched off. There's different variations like Fear the Walking Dead, and they're going to come out with a movie series and everything that I'm really looking forward to. So I guess that would be my pick.
Yeah.
All right. Let's go to Fowler.
Yeah, I'll jump on that one, man. So 2 movies really come to mind because whenever, like what I was talking about earlier, why are you watching horror movies? Well, I have watched them and I watched them to be scared. So 2 horror movies have really left an impact on me. One was The Exorcist, because the first time I watched that movie, I think I went in this, a while back, but my mom and my stepdad were at a Christmas party, and I was like maybe 10 or 11, 12, young, old enough to be left on my own for a night or two. But anyway, that was the first time I watched that movie, and it really scared me to death, right? And then Jeepers Creepers is that second movie, because that dude was just weird, right? Just I don't even know. But yeah, those two movies really left an impact on me.
All right, who's next?
Guess you said round robin, right? So I just figured we're going.
I guess
something.
That's fine.
Are we all in the same direction on our screens, or are we in different orders on our screens? Because that might affect.
I have no idea.
That's a good question.
He can just know it's fine.
We'll go with Caleb Johnson.
Yeah. All right. Well, this is a hard one because I could probably give a list like 5 or 10 long and really have a hard time separating them out. So I'm going to go with probably the most obscure in kind of my top 3.
There you go.
And it actually has really strong Christian themes in it, which is interesting. It's a Korean film called The Wailing. And
that sounds familiar.
Yeah, it's very interesting. It's about investigation of what they think's a demonic presence within this village. And it's got some very interesting twists and turns along the way. It's largely suspenseful. The scares are kind of very few and far between. But it's a very, very good movie.
All right. Well, Clinton, you're up, man.
Yeah. Well, like I said, horror isn't really a genre of movie that I typically enjoy. I remember I went and saw The Ring with a coworker of mine, and no joke, for like 2 weeks afterward, I could not be alone in a room with the television off. So I'm not a person who generally likes to be scared. So my favorite horror movies tend to be more on the comedic side. Like I mentioned, Tremors and Ernest Scared Stupid, and Shaun of the Dead is another one I really enjoy. although I think Hot Fuzz is probably the better film. But when it comes to like legitimate horror films, A Quiet Place is probably up there as one of my favorite horror films. And another one, of course, The Sixth Sense is a classic, but of the M. Night Shyamalan good films, and some people don't think this is a good film, but I would actually argue this was the last of his good films, but it kind of started his decline. Is Signs. I love science fiction films, but this one has such a creepy atmosphere that I can't watch this film on my own, because again, I don't like to be scared. But it's one of my favorite horror films, just because of the general themes of Mel Gibson's character losing his faith, and through all of the events of the film, and all of the events in his life leading up to this alien invasion, he reflects on it and realizes it was all for a purpose, to repel this alien invasion and find their weakness. Was the weakness a good plot twist or not? That, of course, is up for debate, but I just love the general theme of it. So I would say kind of a toss-up between A Quiet Place and Signs is my favorite non-comedic horror film.
Yeah, I would have to break them up in genre too. I would think for like a dark comedy, because that's one of the genres I was going to discuss too. But a dark comedy would be The Lost Boys. I mean, that would be my favorite of all time, dude. I love The Lost Boys, man. I love that movie when I was growing up, man. It's like zombie apocalypse, but with vampires, fortify the house and get the garlic baths ready, Hey,
crossovers are great fun.
Yeah. But as far as like the serious kind of, I have to give it to The Exorcism of Emily Rose. I think was fantastic. Another one that really haunted me when I was a kid was Rosemary's Baby.
That one it's the ending of that one that's kind of messed up.
It's scary, man. Yeah, it's wild to like really think that that this woman's birthing the Antichrist.
And you don't even see it either, right? It's just all implied. It's just you don't even see what the baby looks like, which is even more messed up.
Yeah, that's a bad day there.
So if I'm gonna watch a horror movie, I want it to be more like a psychological thriller. I want it to give me something deep to think about. Like Clinton said, Signs is really great, and so is The Sixth Sense. Those are phenomenal. So yeah, I do like those types the best if I'm going for that scary type of genre. I want something that's like classic and good. Netflix just came out with one the other year. It was called, I think, Eli. I don't know. Maybe that's the one where the kid is like, he's the son of the devil or something. It got silly at some points, and it, kind of disappointed me there. But for a long time, it was going good. That's another thing with horror movies is it doesn't take much to like ruin them. And then you have something like The Shining that was phenomenal. That freaked me out, the classic stuff like that.
I would kind of argue that The Sixth Sense ruined M. Night Shyamalan's career because it was such a great twist that he spent the rest of his career trying to match that twist and just never achieved that greatness again.
Yeah, I would agree.
I wanted to touch on something Clinton said real quick because it just made me realize that I think I'd kind of update my position. I think the movie Dark Skies is really good. It's like an alien abduction movie, but it's actually really scary. And so I think I'd go with that one.
David, have you seen The Omen, the original one?
I have, yes.
Okay, because I feel like that's that same genre.
That's a classic too. I don't think I liked it as much as I thought I was. I thought it was going to be scarier when I was younger, and I didn't watch it. So something like Tyler says, like The Exorcist, and even Poltergeist with the clown, like doll clown. Those things are what petrified me, and I think it was Poltergeist 2 that really got to me the most because you had the guy that was like, because I'm smart, the old Mormon looking guy, right? Or a Quaker or whatever he was. I have no idea, but he led all those people out. And it was freaky, man. Those Poltergeist movies had that effect, even though they were just more, they weren't more of like they're kind of silly because they're done by Spielberg. They weren't like scary, but I think the intent is there, and I think that I think a lot of the older movies, some of the older horror movies, accented the reality of evil. Where like today's horror movies, a lot of them are just like we say, either slash or stupid or just they make no sense. They don't have a real deep moral meaning. You only get a few out of the bunch that are like that now. Versus like when horror movies back in the day, you would get those good moral stories, like even Silver Bullet by Stephen King or The Stand, back in the day. Those were phenomenal.
Well, in fairness, you did have a lot of slashers in the 80s that were really stupid. So it's not as if that was
absolutely. That's where they started. That's where they started. But like you said,
what was that film, Santa Claus Invades Mars?
Right. But you had the first three, right? Those first three, even with those slashers, they did have a moral theme to them. Like Jason's killing kids that are sneaking out and doing stuff out by the lake, right?
Yeah, Michael Myers, yeah.
Yep. Right. Yeah. So so I mean that's where I would stand on that. So anybody else want to say anything else? Anybody have any other movies they want to comment on?
I forgot to go.
Yeah, I don't think I heard from CJ yet.
Yeah. So I kind of agree that I could do a whole list. I'll just give a classic and a modern one because I feel like it would be unfair to compare it like out of all of them. So David already said The Shining, which I think is probably the best aged out of the. I mean, that movie's over 40 years old and still looks great. Also, just because Kubrick is a beautiful cinematography and all that stuff, and the acting is really good. That's still one of the only classic ones that still like creeps me out, just because the atmosphere and the music makes you extremely uncomfortable, and it's a very slow burn. But once it starts to unravel, it's like, oh, this is. It almost feels like a nightmare at some point. Just very surreal. And a modern one, I would say probably the modern one that scares me the most, I remember scaring me the most, was a movie called Sinister, which is actually directed by the guy who did Exorcism of Emily Rose.
Scott Derrickson.
Yeah, who's a Christian. So that movie really messed me up. And I think that's also just because of the music in that movie. If you just listen to parts of the soundtrack, that alone sounds like something out of hell. Like, it's absolutely terrifying. Because they didn't even get, some of it's not even original composition. They would go to these like really nuanced, like obscure, like industrial bands that make these like really atmospheric stuff, and that's what they would play over it. But that movie's about a an author who writes like about true crime, about true murders, and they move into a house. What, you know, surprise, there's been a murder there. That itself isn't that interesting, but he finds these like I don't know if you remember Super 8s. That's past my time. You know, those really old projectors that do that. He finds all these old ones from different decades of these families being murdered, and in each of these videos, you see like this really this person in the background. He's not sure if it's a person or like a monster, and then he starts seeing the same figure around his house, and it kind of unrails there. So that movie really did mess me up, because it was really, I thought it was really scary, and I'm excited to see what Derrickson can do, because that's the one. Oh, one other one I'll mention too was Hereditary. I don't know if anyone's seen that. That's also a very messed up movie. That one's also a bit more on the well, I can't really. It's hard to say it without spoiling things. There's a bit occultism stuff in there, but yeah, that's also a movie that's more of a drama. Really, you feel really bad for the characters, and then it, like by the third act, it just becomes like really like dark. So,
oh wow,
all right,
yeah.
All right. So let's kind of shift gears here. Now, you know, we all said that, you know, yeah, there shouldn't be really a problem when it deals with entertainment and so forth, but I want to go deeper than that. I want to ask, you know, can horror movies be demonically influenced? Are horror movies demonically influenced? Because we know that usually some of these start with the dream, a dream that the person had. Could there be some sort of influence that ends up making it out on the screen? Whoever wants to go first is fine.
I guess I'll go ahead and start. And by the way, somebody mentioned the Blair Witch Project. That was a good movie. But yeah, I think that certain movies can. That's kind of what I was saying. You know, initially, I think we need to be careful if it's teaching, like, you know, things like seances and just occultic type activity. As a Christian, I don't really feel comfortable watching that, really, even as entertainment, because I'm not sure if, you know, demonic entities, you know, could possibly, you know, overflow from that, you know, something like that. So I think it's definitely possible, and it's something that I want to be on guard for, you know, when thinking about, you know, what kind of movie I would be interested in.
Right on. Who's next? Tyler, go.
Tyler.
Yeah, I'll jump. I mean, well, I was kind of looking up something. I was hoping somebody else would jump in, but I was looking up horror movies that led to tragedy, because I don't remember which one it was. Maybe you guys know, but I remember, and it's vague, but some kind of horror movie inspired like a murder or something like that. But I hear what you're saying, David. Sometimes these things can turn people with mental instabilities like onto certain things. They fantasize about these things. There are problems that aren't dealt with that leads to a real life experience, maybe, you know, in an unfortunate event. So I hear what you're saying, man, and I think that there are, in certain cases, and I'm not saying all horror movies are like this, right? But in some certain cases, there are things that happen like that, and it's a tragedy that we need to be prepared whenever it happens to handle it in a Christ-like way, and to be able to, you know, tell these people that it happens to on a daily. I mean, these tragedies happen every day. Not saying that they're inspired by these things, but tragedies do happen, and we just need to, as the church, as the body, you know, be ready to handle it whenever it does. So that's my thoughts on that.
All right, Johnston.
Oh man, I'm distracted. I almost want to respond to that, but you know, instead,
let's chat later, Caleb.
Yeah. In regards to
same, we'll have both Caleb's chatting. So I was going to say something on that too.
Yeah. So, in regards to, you know, can these things be demonically influenced? I'm not sure. I guess the question would be, what would be the purpose of that? I think demonic influence is generally more individual, usually, because I think in order to really have influence over anybody, you have to be more individual. So I'm not sure from a organizational standpoint, I guess, kind of what that could even yield as a benefit. But with that said, I think we're seeing a trend in horror that's moving from what was a very Christian kind of grounded genre in a lot of ways to something that is not. More recent films take on the horror of the existential horror, if you will. So they move away from the idea of there being good and evil to these things being senseless. And Saint Maud is a recent example that comes to mind that very negatively portrays religion of any kind. And it leaves with that existential nothingness, if you will. So I think we're seeing an interesting trend in horror movies right now, but I wouldn't say it's necessarily demonically influenced.
What? Yeah, someone here mentioned in the chat that Blair Witch Project is their all-time favorite, and yeah, you know, that I have seen that film too, and that's another one where you don't see the monster, and it's like, you know, oftentimes not seeing the monster can be scarier than actually seeing a representation of it, and yeah, so. Yeah, and some people may actually rue the day that movie was made because that kind of spawned a whole found film genre of film, and now they get really nonsensical with the found footage kind of stuff. So, but yeah. Oh, Travis, you're still muted, by the way. I couldn't hear what you said, but okay. Yeah, but anyway, regarding you know, yeah, yeah, I mean, of course, movies could be, you know, demonically influenced, just like any film or any genre of art could be, essentially. And then so then the question becomes, well, does the inspiration for it, should that weigh into our determination of whether or not we should listen to a song? And famously, you know, Stairway to Heaven was inspired by you know, Led Zeppelin on drugs, essentially. In fact, probably most rock songs from the 60s and 70s have that kind of inspiration. So does that mean that we should necessarily not listen to those kinds of songs? You know, that's obviously a discussion to have. I would say I don't necessarily think that means that we shouldn't listen to them. I think there's still value in listening to them. But regarding a film which could be inspired demonically, again, like I said, it's possible, but as Christians, especially if we're grounded in the Word, then number one, you know, if the demons were going to try and you know, I don't think a legitimate Christian could ever be demon possessed. So I don't think if you know, demons would work that way through films, at least for a Christian watching. But also, if we're just talking about like demonic influence of something that we as Christians think about, or could be influenced by some of the dialogue or themes in the movie, well, of course, if we're grounded in Scripture, then we're not going to be led astray by the things that we see in a horror film, even if those things are ultimately inspired by demonic forces.
So here's a question for you, Clinton, and we'll get back to the question too. I was going to ask, you know, yeah, Christians can't be possessed, but if we supposedly watch this movie, right, and it is demonically influenced, can we watch it and open a doorway to the demonic as far as oppression?
Like
and we can't be possessed, but can we be oppressed by inviting this? And you know, yeah. So if we're watching something like, okay, let's say it's an abomination, right? Let's say that God is against horror movies, right? And I had a quote here I wanted to read, and I can see if I can find it. But it says, you shall not, it's from Deuteronomy 7:26. It says, you shall not bring an abomination into your house lest you become cursed like it. But you must absolutely detest and abhor it, for it is a cursed thing. And if something is demonically influenced, would you consider it, or and the panel, would you guys consider it as something that's cursed in a way? And could it open that door to be oppressive?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And that kind of speaks to what I said earlier, too, that I think that Christians should be discerning of the type of films that we watch. You know, like I said, there's certain types of horror films I won't watch. I did mention Saw, but, you know, there are others, you know, I don't know, because CJ made a case for the Saw films, and I haven't seen them, so I'll have to defer to him on that question. But then I mentioned a film like the Bellco Experience, the Bellco Experiment, which, if what my friends have told me about the film is true, that is not a film that I would want to watch, and it's not one that I would want to bring home to my home either. Not because I think it's necessarily demon inspired, although it could be. I don't know. Like I said, I haven't seen it, but it's just nothing is done with what could have been an interesting ethical discussion, and it's more primarily just for the ways that they kill each other. And so that kind of film is not a film that I would feel comfortable watching. And so I do think that Christians do need to be discerning on the types of films that we watch, especially when it comes to the horror genre. But also we shouldn't just go overboard, as many of the more fundamentalist bent Christians have a tendency to do. We shouldn't just neglect all horror films because they might deal with demonic themes. And again, I'm not trying to insult anyone. I don't mean fundamentalist in any sort of derogatory way that many today would mean. I just mean the more I don't know, maybe the more like, I can't really even say conservative, because I'm conservative myself, but I wouldn't necessarily consider myself a fundamentalist. So I just want people to know I'm not using that term in a derogatory sense. Just the more the Christians who might be opposed to some of the things that we would say are okay, dances, playing cards, that kind of thing.
Like
there's a
Calvinist.
more fundamentalist bent. Sure, I'm not a Calvinist either. But that's probably a jab at Tyler, I'm guessing. Yeah. Okay. So then again, I would just say that I just think that Christians do need to be discerning, and I think that could be a possible way. So, but again, we shouldn't go 100% in the other direction either. Just reject all horror films, because some of the things in the Bible are pretty horrific too. So if we're just going to reject all horror, well, then there's certain passages of the Bible that we can't be reading. So we really just need to be discerning. And and this is why parents should obviously watch a movie before signing off on their kids seeing a film too. So that's just kind of my 2 cents there.
Can I just raise a question, Clinton? Do you think The Passion is a horror film?
In terms of genre, no. What they did to Christ, I would say, is pretty horrific.
No, right, absolutely.
But in terms of like film genre, no, I would say no.
No, I agree 100%. I just saw it, on social media the other day. People were talking about The Passion and being a horror film, and I just, just wanted your thoughts on that. So, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, sounds like we're probably in agreement there then.
Yeah.
Sure.
It is interesting, and we're gonna follow up on that. But I first wanted to keep going around because I know it was Caleb's turn to, or CJ's turn to comment on that last question. Go ahead, Caleb.
So I guess I would just dispute the idea of like what exactly it means to be, or how we're defining demonically influenced, because I don't think anyone's thinking that the director is making a pact with Satan as he's making this movie, right? So I mean, I think that's just not clear. I mean, they have had movie sets like The Exorcist, The Omen, where they blessed them beforehand. I don't know if that's saying that they were worried about it. There are also other franchises that are believed to be cursed. I mean, Russell brought up Poltergeist. There's a kind of a thing online about the Poltergeist curse, because they actually did use real skeletons in the movie because they were cheaper than fake ones, and multiple actors died of mysterious circumstances within a few years of the movie. But I wouldn't say that's evidence of demonic oppression. At least I wouldn't be able to prove that. I thought Tyler's point earlier was also really interesting about inspiring people to do horrible things, and that's also pertinent to movies that aren't even like strictly horror films. But I remember a few years ago when the Joker movie came out, people were very concerned about that, because back when Dark Knight Rises, there was that theater shooting of someone dressing up as Joker and shooting people, and of course that movie, some would say it glorifies violence, but it certainly does at least make you sympathize for him as a person and as someone who's mentally ill. And there is, I think, a moral message with stuff like that, of these people are really treated bad in society and need help. And this is what it can lead to. Now, of course, you don't want to say that they're doing the right thing by doing these horrible things. And another, but that's just the idea of it. And another movie that we've already talked about that actually kind of is aware of that, again, is Scream, because Scream is very self-aware. There's one line I really like in Scream. And to give context for those who haven't seen it, the whole movie is about these. There's a secret killer. They don't know who it is, but the person who it turns out to be, they talk about how they wanted to make their own like real life horror movie, and they wanted to reenact this stuff. And they have a nice line of saying, don't blame the movies. Movies don't make psychos. Movies just make psychos more creative. And there was actually a lot of controversy, because the other sequels would happen where people would see the Scream movies and then try to make their own and all that stuff. And actually, when Columbine happened in the late 90s, the MPAA really got onto the Scream franchise and made them cut back a lot of the violence because they were very worried that people were getting inspired, teenagers were getting inspired to do these horrible things. So I think the data we have as far as video games and violent movies inspiring crime is very bad. And you could look at Japan that has some of the most violent video games, and they're also one of the most peaceful societies. So I don't think there's a direct correlation there, but I do think it is an interesting discussion about media and how it influences us in general. So
sounds like I hear a werewolf in the background.
Right.
that would be my dog.
All right. Anybody else on this before I take us to the next stage here? Anybody else? Okay, so it kind of brings up the question. Caleb was like, okay, so what do you mean by how's it demonically influenced? And I think that could range. That could be a broad subject. Yeah, maybe it doesn't go as far as some guy making a pact with Satan, but as far as being deceptive, this demonic influence, you get this dream or whatever, and it's influenced by the demonic and taken to the big screen, and now there's attachments to it, if you believe in attachments or so forth, like the Annabelle doll, like we talked about last week, right, Caleb? So like we've got a question, and this is also in response to Caleb. Where does horror originate, for one, and how do we discern? What's a good way to discern what is good and what is not? Because Clinton won't go to see the Saw, but CJ says the Saw has good points and it's okay to see. How does a Christian rightly divide that line of truth? So we got to have some practical in this for the Christian to give somebody a notion of, okay, where do you draw the line?
I guess if we're going to start with the same order, where I draw the line is, as far as like slasher movies, I don't really see anything wrong with watching them as a Christian. It's just whether or not you would find that entertaining. In fact, I remember watching the first Saw when it came out. I thought it was good, like maybe the first one. I think the other ones were kind of bad, but anyway, where I would draw the line is, I think if the movie itself is involving like, let's say, witchcraft, Ouija boards, just things of the occult, that's something that I'm going to want to steer clear of. But otherwise, I think, horror movies are fine as long as we, have a healthy mind and use discernment. I don't see anything wrong with it. I'm just really hesitant to watching things that are, occultish in nature.
Yeah. I think we all go through, as individuals, we all go through certain different places in our life where different things interest us at different points in our life. Yeah. And so if some of these things interest you, then hey, go for it. Because I think this conversation has been extremely helpful, because I never looked at Christian morals in a horror film before. I just looked at it like, oh, they're killing people, great, but you guys have broke it down like that. That's made me interested in this again, to go back and rewatch those things to find those different little Easter eggs in them, right? So thank you for that. Secondly, to David's point, I think there are different like degrees on which we say demonically inspired, right? Can things influence people? Absolutely. It makes psychos more creative, right? So I think there's a line that is drawn. And for me personally, at my stage, like, to go back and find these things, these different Christian morals in these movies, I want to do that. But we're not saying go out and watch them. If it don't appeal to you, don't watch it. It's very simple.
So you're saying that the appeal could also be part of your discernment?
Yeah, I think so. I think that,
okay.
Or it could add to it, if you start watching something that you don't know of, maybe you haven't experienced it yet, getting into it, watching it a little bit, you find out, hey, that's not for me. It's just added to it, right? And so it makes you more discern, whenever you apply it like that, in my opinion, anyway.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Tyler.
Yeah.
Caleb?
Yeah, I actually agree with that. I think that the line is probably a little different for everybody, because what's the line for one person may not be for the other, and it may vary in your lifetime as to where that is. I've certainly seen movies that I wish I hadn't seen in hindsight, but I still saw artistic value in them that somebody probably could get at some point, even though I think it's outweighed by some of the content. But I mean, even with more extreme content, I mean, we live in a pretty watered down time compared to what other people have lived through over the thousands and thousands of years of humanity. And so, you know, I think there may even be some value in some of the gorier content, because while it's got to be viewed in the same way as a drug, though, because it has the same impact on the brain. So you have to be careful with that. But I think there may even be some value to recognizing that we're in a pretty watered down time in society. And, you know, when you encounter those raw moments of life that are horrific, you know, there may be some value in being mentally prepared for that a little bit.
Yeah, so you're saying it also depends on the maturity level of the Christian as well.
Yep.
That's a really
right.
yeah.
Clinton?
Yeah, you know, I really don't think I have any really hard and fast rules, because I'm thinking, you know, someone in the chat also mentioned Event Horizon, and that's a film I've seen too. So the rules that I have for the movies I don't like to see, like I don't like to see slasher films, but I love science fiction movies. So if it has a science fiction backdrop, I'm usually a little bit more lenient about the movies that I'll allow myself to see. You know, like I said, I've seen Alien, and Alien was basically a slasher movie set in space, essentially. So, you know, and also, you know, I don't like to see movies that are too gory, but, you know, I've also seen Monty Python and the Quest for the Holy Grail, and you see a knight get dismembered for comedic effect. So, you know, so I think, you know, so I don't think I necessarily have any hard and fast rules. And like I said, you know, I don't begrudge anyone for the horror films they have seen. If their conscience is different than mine, that's, you know, that's between them and God. I don't begrudge them the films. You know, go with, you know, with my blessing, with God's blessing. If that's what your conscience is allowing you to see, that's perfectly fine. So I don't, you know, I don't judge anyone for the films that they see either. So I don't want to, you know, I don't want anyone thinking I'm trying to be judgmental either. It's just kind of my own personal things, you know, because I don't like movies that are too graphically violent, and that doesn't just appear. That's not just horror films either. I tried to sit through, for example, Saving Private Ryan, and I could only make it about 3/4 of the way through before I had to step outside and get some fresh air. Otherwise, I was going to vomit because of just how graphic that film was, and it's a war film, you know. So yeah, so I would say no real hard and fast rules, just, you know, I tend to avoid movies that are too graphically violent, movies that have, like, you know, extremely graphic sexual content, you know, just like if it's too extremely graphic, it has to be really, really good and have a really, really interesting discussion that I could take away from it if I'm going to sit through a film like that. So,
all right, CJ.
Yeah, I don't know if I have anything to add. I would agree with what pretty much everyone said, especially Caleb, not just because he has a great name, but because I like what he said about like the maturity level of the Christian. That was said by other people here as well. Just because I think like my tolerance is higher than some people's, and some people have a higher tolerance than I do. So it is subjective, and it's also hard because I feel like you can find meaning and some kind of moral message in most things if you try hard enough. Now, whether or not you're reading that message into it or if it was intended originally is something up for question. You know, people can overanalyze film, but there are certain movies I can think of that I wouldn't recommend to anyone just because of the content, and sometimes they come off just shocking for the sake of being shocking. So like one of the most disturbing movies of all time, according to like the internet, would be a movie called A Serbian Film. Like that's actually what it's called, A Serbian Film. I'm not recommending anyone to go watch it.
That's the one I was subtly referencing a moment ago.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm not going to talk about what it's about, but you can Google it if you're interested. But I'm not going to discuss it here. But yeah, it's just because of the content in it, and because sometimes that comes off as being try hard, and it doesn't really have any good moral message that I can see. That would be hard for me to recommend personally. But again, I'm not going to say like, oh, how, you know, you've watched this and this. But I mean, that doesn't mean there isn't media that I don't think Christians shouldn't watch. But again, it just depends on your discernment. But there would be like certain like pornographic things, I think it'd be very hard to justify on a Christian perspective, just because of the entire point of the nature. So it really just depends on what it is. But
and that's
needs to be a line somewhere. Yeah,
that's what the line I did want to like kind of hash out a little bit, because if we're gonna say, okay, well, pornography's bad, then why isn't movies where there's extreme killing and murder, why is it that's easier to allow ourselves to watch as entertaining, but the pornographic's not? You know, I could get a moral message out of Debbie Does Dallas, right? No, I'm just, you know, or some crazy thing. But no, I'm just being real. I'm just being real. Like if you eisegete, if you read something into it that's not there, you know, or anything, right? Or you look at like Saul, or you look at The Purge, where it's just this mindless killing. You get a night just to kill people, and Saul, where each movie progresses and shows you different ways to kill people. You know, where is that line? You know, is there an objective line, or is it purely subjective? Can person A watch Debbie, or can versus a mature person watching the Saul, a mature Christian? I mean, I don't think so. So I think that, we've got to kind of, okay, where is that discernment? And that's what I'm trying to get out. Sorry.
Yeah.
I'll let you go first. We'll go reverse order, Caleb. CJ.
Yeah, again, it just depends on how it's presented, because you could have, like, if you made the Bible if you could make a full-length movie of the whole Bible, which, would be like 10 hours long, and you did it like completely as narrated, uncut, you would probably get an R rating or NC-17 rating, but it depends on how you would depict it. So you have things like, David sleeping with Bathsheba. There are tasteful ways to say that for the narrative point of view, because for the story it's necessary. So I don't want to say, oh, all sex scenes or all violence is just gratuitous and unnecessary, because sometimes it is relevant to the story, but it is depending on how you present it, right? So I think the difference between like sexual things versus violent things is that, at least in most cases, in pornographic instances, it's typically real. I mean, you can have simulated stuff, but in violence, it's almost always fake. You don't have people actually dying. Unless you're talking about like stuff like on Live Leak or footage like that. So I think the intent there is different, and I also think, again, like the idea of killing has more narrative potential, I think, than sex. Generally speaking, there are exceptions, but it really just depends on it. And typically, films of the more sexual kind like that don't have any point other than just to exploit the gratuitous nature of it, whereas the better violent films actually have a point to the violence and actually have a message behind it. So that's kind of the whole point, is there's at least more of a narrative there, generally speaking. But it just depends on how it's done and how it's presented. So it's really hard to speak generally on those, and you have to speak on a taste by taste basis. But yeah, I don't think that I don't necessarily like people who are like gore hounds, or if you're watching the film just to see how many cool kills you can get in creative ways, then I would say that's questionable. Although, again, I get that you're not seeing real people die, but it's like, okay, I can understand why that's a bit trickier. But if you're seeing it to actually be entertained and have a story told to you, I don't think that itself is bad. So,
yeah.
Anybody else?
Yeah, actually, I was just going to say real quick. I do apologize for the bad lighting in this room. I'm kind of in shadow here, but I'm not a professional YouTuber, so unfortunately, I don't have like a great lighting. But yeah, I mean, I'll just chime in real quick, because I actually have very little to add from what CJ just said. I really agree that stuff like sex and violence could be essential to the story that they're trying to tell, but there are ways to present it that are less gratuitous, more tasteful. There's a way that you can just briefly show something happened and cut away or fade away to the next scene, or you could just have like a full-blown sex scene in your film, and that's more for titillating the audience than it is because that sexual tryst is necessary for your story. There's a way you can include that information without actually being as graphic as you would want to be. So that's just basically, I pretty much agree with what CJ was saying.
Do you think that something like The Passion of the Christ is exploitative in the violence, or do you think that it's, because that's a question too? Like, is it trying too hard, or is it just saying, oh, well, this is realistic, this is what would
Yeah, it was definitely very graphic. I mean, I would give the Passion of the Christ a pass because it's based on a real event. So it's not like they're just including things for the purpose of, wanting to entertain the audience. Because really, Mel Gibson aside, because he's kind of a wacky person in and of himself, but he was trying to tell a true story of Christ's crucifixion. And the crucifixion was a very, very gruesome event. And I think a lot of times Christians reading it in the Bible don't really take that to heart because we're just reading words on a page. It doesn't really come alive to us in the way that watching it actually happen on screen can show it. So, I know for myself, watching, I did see The Passion of the Christ in the theater. And for me, it really brought Christ's crucifixion alive in a way that just reading the words didn't. So even though it's a gruesome film, and it's not a film that I would just throw on because I have nothing else to do on a Friday night, but I really think that, number one, because it was based on an actual event and showing the actual events that occurred, and number two, bringing the story alive to people who need it brought alive in a way that just reading the words couldn't. For those reasons, I really just give Passion of the Christ a pass. And I think that what Mel Gibson did, even though he took some liberties based on his Catholic views with the storytelling from Scripture, but for the most part, I think what Mel Gibson actually did was a really good thing by filming The Passion of the Christ.
Yeah, there's going to be a sequel too with all the same.
Yeah, I heard about that.
Yeah, it's going to be about the resurrection and the 3 days he was dead, which is going to be pretty cool. You see how he can weave that as far as church tradition. He says he had a lot of studying to do. But real quick, let me just throw this in there since we're talking about the seriousness of it all. And I was going to say something, but I totally forgot. So I'm going to let Kayla go.
All right. I was going to dive in and just say, after thinking about this a little more and the way you raised the question, David, I think there actually is a distinction between pornography and gore. Because I think that line we can actually draw from the Bible, and I think it would be intoxication. We see principles we can draw about alcohol in the Bible regarding avoiding intoxication, except in what appear to be very rare circumstances that are celebratory in nature. And I think we can draw the same kind of thing, maybe if we take that concept of intoxication and compare it to these two things. Can you become intoxicated on gore? Possibly, if your brain is messed up in a particular way. If you're a psychopath or a sociopath, then you could possibly become intoxicated on gore. For most of us, I don't think we can, because we have a repulsion factor to it at a certain point. I would say that you could very easily become that on the other.
Hold on. How many times have you rolled by a car crash and you just have to look? I mean, is that triggering that perspective? Like,
you haven't been on
I literally
websites,
saw. I literally drove past a motorcycle accident where the guy's head was gone. And I looked. I was like, "Holy moly!"
And it's popular too. There's a YouTube video of a congressman who shot himself in the head live on TV and has millions of views because people are just like want to see what it looks like. Yeah.
Well, I
that
think
curiosity factor is crazy to begin with, but and
I think that might actually kind of still speak to what Caleb was saying too, because if you drive by an accident and you just have to look, which by the way is not a practice I endorse, because you're actually creating more of a traffic hazard by stopping to look at an accident than just driving on by. But the fact that people do that, I don't think that's necessarily because they like violence or gore. It's just that curiosity factor. Like what happened is it could be a bit of nosiness and gossiping too, but it's that curiosity factor. Like what does a gruesome accident look like? Because I've never seen one. You're not looking because you like that sort of thing. You're just looking at it with curiosity. So I think there's still that revulsion factor that what Caleb was talking about there too.
Yeah. Tyler?
No, I mean, I can't really add to what's been said. I mean, honestly, though, kind of taking it back, I do think there's something within all of us that makes us want to look, right? But, to get intoxicated off of it versus curiosity, again, it goes back to that subjective thing and your maturity in Christ. Where are you with the Lord? Are these things, is there a liberty in these things? Absolutely. But I really can't add much more than that to what's been said.
Right. Caleb, you had something else to say real quick, Caleb, because you were in the middle of it when I kind of cut you off there with that point.
Me or Johnson?
Caleb Johnson.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think as we were talking about pornography, I think that intoxication is pretty much obvious to everybody there. Like, you don't watch that without a mental intoxication of some kind. I think that's different for gore per se. So that was just how I was capping off the point there.
Right. Yeah, right. Actually, I do kind of like what Caleb is saying, and that's a point I hadn't considered before. People who watch horror movies like slasher films for that kind of thing, you do have to kind of have, be twisted or have something wrong in your brain to enjoy seeing that kind of thing, as opposed to sex, which is something that's universally enjoyed by people. Now, obviously, there are some people who do have sort of an addiction to it, and shouldn't, they shouldn't be watching, not talking about pornography, just watching like in a standard, R-rated film. There are some people who, if you're an alcoholic, you shouldn't go to a bar. But if you're a Christian who doesn't struggle with alcoholism, then going to a bar can be permissible because you're able to drink socially and cut yourself off before it gets to that point. So, so there are some people who are wired in such a way that they should just avoid all that kind of stuff, anyway, because of how they're wired. But, sexual content is just universally something that we all can fall into sin regarding. Whereas, you can have, in fact, just watching a sex scene, in an R-rated film where, they might, where they're just kind of simulating it, not showing it like in pornography, that still gets your brain working and going places that it shouldn't. But for most of us, seeing that excessive violence in a horror film is not going to make us start thinking, I want to go kill, X person, or you're not going to start dwelling on that and start thinking about ways you want to kill people. So I think Caleb actually brings up a good point here, that there might be a distinction there, whereas you have to be twisted to enjoy the excessive violence, but regarding sex, that's something that's universal that we can all kind of fall into.
Yeah, because I'm kind of thinking back, and I hear what you're saying, Clinton, about that, but I'm thinking first century Rome. People went to the Colosseum to see people die on a daily, but yet I agree that didn't make them want to go out and kill people, maybe, right? But they did enjoy that in the sense like what you're talking about with lust, right? So is there that connection there, or is that like a cultural thing?
Well, I wouldn't necessarily say. Well, I mean, I think there is some cultural aspect to it. Like I think most of us in 21st century America would be repulsed by the thought of going to a Colosseum to see people kill each other.
I agree.
But I think there is a difference there, in that in the Colosseum, you're watching real people actually kill each other, whereas in a violent movie, you're just watching people act out these kinds of things. And now, of course, in an R-rated film, you're watching simulated sex. You're not watching real sex like in pornography. But again, that goes back to the point of even simulated sex can cause anyone's brain to go where it shouldn't, whereas watching simulated murders aren't necessarily going to get you to start dwelling on and thinking bad thoughts about harming other people.
Gotcha. Can I make one comment on the stadium? Sorry, go ahead, David.
I just think that, like, I hear what you're saying, Clinton, but there is this aspect to our humanity that's dark, and that these people are producing these images, so they're the ones thinking about these things and putting it out there for other people's entertainment. So do I think it does inspire some people in that twisted way, like you say, and I do see sex as a universal good. So a corruption of that universal good, I think, would incite the same curiosity for a person that doesn't like killing per se, versus the opposite for somebody that does like killing. It might, the death, the killing might incite that. And I just think it comes to different levels. How far are we corrupted? How deep does that depravity go, and where does it go on different levels? It's different for different people, like you were saying too. And I agree that if you have a problem with drinking, you don't go to a bar. If you have a problem with blood and guts, don't go to see a horror movie. And I think that's just applicable advice for any Christian. But I just wanted to let CJ make his point real quick.
Yeah, real quick. I just wanted to say, Yeah, just real quick, I just want to say that I'm also, like I said, Caleb is making me think about that for the first time. So I'm not necessarily saying I agree. I'm just kind of trying to view devil's advocate here and kind of, so I could still be argued back the other way. So
I get you, and that's all. I'm just that's the whole point of this, is just trying to hash it out, right? So it's not like I'm disagreeing with you. I'm just bringing up like maybe we could look at it like this too,
Right.
But go ahead, Caleb.
Yeah, no. So I was gonna make a comment on the stuff about the Coliseums and the death stadiums, because I don't necessarily know if we've moved past that. I mean, we have moved past it in one sense, but it is ironic to me when people try to criticize gore in movies, but at the same time they'll go to a football game where people get real injuries, people actually have died, and they're just killing themselves very slowly through mental issues often, and they have no issue praising them when they're getting tackles and actually doing real harm. Far more people have been hurt through sports and through football than have been hurt through movies and stuff, as far as like actual violence. I'm not saying we should ban football or anything like that, but I'm just saying I think that idea of cheering for violence, because we just don't think about the time of this person could actually get hurt or have some long-term problems health-wise. Same with wrestling. There have been people who've broken their necks and become paraplegics because of that. So again, I'm not saying that we can't do that. I'm not saying we should ban them. I'm just saying that I think is a bigger issue, and it is weird to me that is so readily accepted and less controversial than violence in media, but people want to act as if it's the movies that are causing people to do violence and not the actual people doing violence. But
well, I mean, taking even a step further, CJ, like UFC, right? Football, wrestling, I get it, but UFC, that's the main, combat sport per se that draws that kind of attention. So I hear what you're saying, brother.
Yeah, and you're specifically going to watch two people bludgeon each other,
Exactly.
So it's wild.
Don't you watch NASCAR for the crashes? I mean, isn't
and hockey for the fights, right? Hockey for the fights, right? So
why are you watching people?
There is this nature to us that does have this weird fascination with just knocking the sense right out of each other. I don't know. It's pretty wild. But and I think there's levels, but I think overall I'm hearing the same thing. So Christians out there, if you're gonna watch a horror movie, make sure that your conscience isn't bothered, that you're not crossing a line that you feel like you shouldn't be crossing. If you have adverse reactions to different scenes or different gore or violence, then don't watch it. If you're trying to learn something and you're at that maturity level, like Travis was saying, he doesn't watch things with the occult. I think watching how they do some of these practices is educating for me, because I'm not going to do it, but I do see what they're doing, and it gives me an apologetic against it. So if you're at that stage, then be careful, know what you're getting into, and with all things, be in prayer and supplication to God. So that's my takeaway. Yeah. Tyler?
No, I think you're right on, man. I really do. Can I just read a part of Romans 14 real quick? Just real quick. Romans 14:1 says, "Now receive the one who is weak in faith, and do not have disputes over differing opinions." I think that's a lot of what we, around this time of the year, Christians, we argue enough as it is, and we just add something else to argue about around October 31st. And what we forget is also on this day, one of the greatest things happened in Christian history, one of the greatest, and that was the Protestant Reformation, right? And without that, all of those different things that we argue about today and what they did back then, none of it matters if we don't live these things out. If we don't take away what we hear, what we listen to, what we read, and actually apply those things. So more directly to this conversation, glorify God in all things that you do. If you don't want to watch a horror movie, don't watch a horror movie. If you want to watch it to see the Christian morals that these guys have been talking about all night, watch the movie. If one of these guys have sparked your opinion, and sparked your curiosity into these things, do it for that, right? But don't be judgmental on your neighbor. Don't be divisive just to be divisive over this time of year, because we've got so many things to rejoice about that it really kicks all the rest out, to be perfectly honest. But I mean, let's just be mature. Let's love this Halloween, this Reformation Day anniversary when Martin Luther nailed the 95 Thesis on the Wittenberg door. But yeah, man.
Only
I mean,
what about a couple decades away from what Calvin did to the Huguenots?
Something like that. Yeah. Something like that. So,
yeah, that was horrific in itself.
Right.
Calvin,
yeah,
Calvin was horrific.
Yeah, Calvin,
with
that
Michael
guy.
Servetus and all that. Yeah, I was gonna make the joke when Caleb
horrible
was talking about
mistakes.
when Johnson was talking about existential horror and nihilism. I was thinking like, wow, that sounds a lot like Calvinism, but I've already made the joke now. So
yeah. No, I told David the other day, him and Calvinism, it's kind of like whenever we were kids and we had this crush on the girl, and you just kept picking on them because you really like them. That's David with Calvinism. So anyway, but that's my takeaway from this whole thing, man. And you guys have been great, and thank you all for having me on. I really appreciate it. I've had a lot of fun. Caleb, Clinton, and CJ, you guys have brought a lot to this table. You guys have made me think, and I'm really appreciative of that. So thank you guys. It's been awesome.
Right on. Go ahead, Caleb.
Yeah, well, this is what I love about these kind of conversations, is to be able to have these kind of conversations with other Christians and discuss these kind of issues. I think that's great, because this is not the kind of thing that was available to me. Growing up in the circles I was within church, couldn't even broach this topic without being shot down. So it's nice to be able to have these kind of conversations, and I think we've set a good example with that tonight as to how you can take these kind of things and you can have a conversation around it, whether it's a film or whether it's the subject itself. So yeah,
right on. Clinton, go ahead, man.
Yeah, well, I really have nothing to add. I think everything's been said that we need to say. I really appreciate you, having this discussion. For one thing, like Caleb said, oftentimes a discussion around things like horror films and can often be shut down. Because I grew up in a pretty strict, not too strict, but pretty strict Southern Baptist church, and now I'm a Lutheran, which means that I can drink alcohol now. I have some of that kind of in my past, and I just, like I said, have nothing really more to add. I think the discussion's been really great. I appreciate Tyler, Caleb, and CJ, and who was the other guy who was with us? Travis. Coming on for the discussion with David, and just appreciate you having this discussion and bringing us on, and thanks.
Absolutely. CJ.
Yeah, I thought this was fun, and I don't really have that much to add, but hopefully we'll have these conversations in the future. And I think we all had some really good stuff to contribute each. So thanks for having the show.
Right on. Yeah, Christians, Halloween is one of the only nights people will come to your door, redeem the holiday. Okay. Instead of you having to go out, they come to your door. What we used to do, and we haven't done it lately because of all the stuff going on, but set up a stand. If you have a carport, open your carport. That's where you hand out candy. Give the parents some hot chocolate or some hot cider, and talk to them about God. If you're one of these adverse people that just sit in your house with the lights, watching the little babies pass by, not giving them candy, which you should be ashamed of not doing, go outside, set up a table, and redeem the holiday. Okay, if you think it's that bad. I take my kids trick-or-treating. I'm not scared to tell you that. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. I don't think there's anything wrong with watching horror movies if you have the mindset to handle it. And I think there's a lot of liberty in your walk with Christ. So I wanted to end with that note. I think everybody here would be in agreement with me. Have a safe Halloween. It's tomorrow. Those that have parents, make sure you take your flashlights. And if you're in an open carry state, open carry. It's all good.
Right.
Anyways,
keep kids safe from vampires and
I'm a
werewolves and
Second
things.
Amendment supporter, man. But then again, I have to use one for my job anyway. So, anyways, everybody, I hope you have a safe Halloween. Stand by next week. Travis is going to be in charge of a interview that's coming up with a couple people. He's got like 2 in a week, so I'm really excited to see what he's got going on, and he's going to do some interviews. We've got a lot of stuff in the works right now with Reasons to Believe. We got 2 more discussions with them. We got Jeff Zerwink coming on in December with Jordan. They're going to be talking about the current state of the Kalam. We're going to be talking about cosmological arguments in general with Blake Gunta and Rich Harkness. We also have what's the other one I have going? And Ken Samples coming on in December with Reasons to Believe for an interview on his new book about Christianity. So I'm really excited to do all that, and I'm gonna probably make a video with the dates on it and times. So stand by, and we'll do this again sometime. And as always, I try to get us together maybe once a quarter or something to come in and do something fun. So again, everybody, thanks for watching.